with all these slave masters posing on your dollar.
Not many of us remember the Bundy Ranch standoff, but I do. I remember how the right wing on social media was up in arms over it. The big bad government was trying to unjustly take a rancher's property. It ended up with armed militia members from all over the country meeting federal agents to prevent them from carrying out a federal court order. Why did this event not end with any citizens being unalived by federal agents? Why did the right not have this just comply bro mentality that they have now? How are these two similar situations treated so different? Well, it's complicated. The Bundy Standoff. On April 5th, 2014, the Bureau of Land Management and law enforcement rangers began to round up livestock after 21 years of legal battles with the Bundys. The dispute started in 1993 when Cliven Bundy refused to renew his permit for cattle grazing in protest of the new rules. In 1998, Bundy was prohibited by the U.S. District Court for the District of Nevada from grazing his cattle on an area of land called the Bunkerville Allotment. July of 2013, a federal judge ordered Bundy to refrain from grazing on federal lands in the Gold Butte area. However, the standoff we all know wasn't the first time they tried to remove his cattle. In 1996, the National Park Service made plans to remove cattle that were illegally trespassing in the Lake Mead. The operation was canceled due to concerns of violence, and the U.S. Attorney's Office told them to back off. Bundy has accumulated more than $1 million in unpaid grazing fees and court-ordered fines. The United States government sued Bundy in the case of United States v. Bundy. The judge found that the land disputed by Bundy was indeed owned by the federal government, that Bundy had not been paying to use it as he should have been, that he was trespassing, and that the government had the right to enforce the injunctions against trespass. The judge also found that Bundy had repeatedly violated court orders. While this case went on, Bundy's cattle expanded onto additional public lands. A planned roundup in April of 2012 was canceled because Bundy made violent threats against the Bureau of Land Management. The local police did not assist BLM because the sheriff had felt that the original warrant had become stale and wanted the Bureau to seek a new warrant. In May of 2012, the government filed the second United States v. Bundy case to seek renewal of the original enforcement order. On October 8, 2013, a federal judge issued an order that allowed the United States to protect the Bunkerville allotment against trespass by Bundy and to seize and remove to impound any of his cattle that remained in those areas. All of Bundy's claims were defeated in federal court. He failed to demonstrate the existence of special grazing rights to public land. Bundy also argued that the federal government lacks jurisdiction because the United States did not own the land in question. The court ruled that the public lands in Nevada are the property of the United States because the United States held the title to those public lands since 1848, when Mexico seceded the land to the United States. Bundy also argued that the United States' ownership over public domain lands violated Article 4 of the Constitution. The court rejected this argument. The Bureau of Land Management then conducted a survey and counted 908 heads of cattle spread over 1,200 square miles on federal land. Before they began their enforcement, they posted this statement on their website. Cattle have been in trespass on public lands in southern Nevada for more than 2 decades. This is unfair to the thousands of other ranchers who graze livestock in compliance with federal laws and regulations throughout the West. The Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service have made repeated attempts to resolve this matter administratively and judiciously. An impoundment of cattle illegally grazing on public lands is now being conducted as a last resort. The Bureau of Land Management also made multiple attempts to offer to buy the cattle and give the Bundys the proceeds, or to just leave the area and keep his cattle. They set up 2 First Amendment zones for members of the public to express their First Amendment rights and a separate designated media area. From April 5th to April 9th, government contractors rounded up about 400 cattle, with 90% of them having Bundy's cattle branding. Somewhere around this same time, hundreds of armed people and private militia members joined other peaceful protesters against the cattle roundup. On April 8th, the Nevada governor called for the removal of the First Amendment zones that he views as offensive. Federal agencies complied and told protesters that they could roam wherever they wanted as long as they remained peaceful. On April 10th, protesters blocked a Bureau of Land Management truck and hit it with an ATV. Federal officials reported that a police dog was kicked and agents were assaulted. On April 12th, Bundy addressed an armed crowd stating that they were about ready to take the country over with force. After the roundup was suspended, Bundy suggested blocking a highway, and protesters blocked a portion of Interstate 15 for more than 2 hours.
Okay, we need a little bit of safety here. We're going to go up the freeway. We're going to block the freeway.
BLM Rangers warned that they would use tear gas on a crowd that had converged at the mouth of Gold Butte. A former Arizona sheriff that was with the protesters said the crowd was strategizing to put all the women up at the front. If they are going to start pew-pewing, it's going to be women that are going to be televised all across the world getting pewed by those rogue federal officers. Hold on. You see that guy? He was the first anti-Black Lives Matter protester to have ever existed. They've been against black people since then. Now, I don't like to make fun of people, but that is the definition of rural America. Face and all. Others with rifles took positions on a highway overpass and aimed directly at federal agents, while a group led by horse-mounted wranglers confronted the BLM agents. Las Vegas police were not allowed to wear protective gear because they did not want to seem provocative. Las Vegas Metro Deputy Chief Tom Roberts diffused the situation before any violence happened.
St. George.
Well, basically, we've brokered a deal to where we can release the cattle back to the Bundy family.
Clark County Sheriff Gillespie mediated an agreement between both sides, saying, "When a group of protesters threaten civil unrest or violence in this county, it is my job to step in and ensure the safety of citizens." Bureau of Land Management Director Neil Korn said that based on information about conditions on the ground and in consultation with law enforcement, we have made a decision to conclude the cattle gather because of our serious concern about the safety of employees and members of the public. These are the facts when it comes to the Bundy Ranch standoff. Why is this important? Because this is a clear example of hypocrisy of the anti-government right when it comes to the case of Alex Pretty. Why were these protesters not telling Bundy to just comply? Bundy was stealing resources from the public that other ranchers were paying for. Bundy was not only stealing, but profiting off those lands. He would then sell the cattle that were allowed to freely graze on these lands. This is theft of American taxpayer money. Why is it that the protesters who took Bundy's side are now singing a different tune when it comes to these anti-ICE protests? How come their tune has become comply or die? The anti-ICE protests. 2 U.S. citizens have been murdered by ICE in the last couple of months, Alex Pretty and Renee Good. As Donald Trump's administration pours billions of dollars into their campaign to remove the undocumented, they have also decided that the process and how that should be accomplished is above the law. Fundamentally, the protests are not about law enforcement, but how that enforcement is being used. For example, Democratic lawmakers have planted their feet on warrantless searches. Democrats have demanded that any bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security include language codifying judicial warrant requirements for ICE agents. Johnson contended it would take decades for ICE agents to secure judicial warrants for people here illegally, and that there weren't enough judges to handle the load.
Imagine if we had to go through the process of getting a judicial warrant, an additional warrant, to go and apprehend people who we know are here illegally. How much time would that take? We don't have enough judges. We don't have enough time. It would take decades probably to do that.
The problem with Speaker Johnson's statement is that it violates the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment states the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. The Fifth Amendment states no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall have private property be taken for public use without just compensation. In both amendments, the word citizen is not used to denote who has protections, but the word person is. Under the Supreme Court's ruling in U.S. v. Verdugo-Urquidez, any person with substantial voluntary connections to the United States is protected by the Fourth Amendment's prohibition of unreasonable searches and seizures, and the government needs a warrant based on probable cause before conducting a search or seizure. Having a judicial warrant has been a long-standing practice for federal immigration enforcement agencies. Trump's administration has stated that administrative warrants should suffice. Immigration lawyers push back, stating that these warrants are not signed off by any judge and only ICE officers themselves, with no external oversight. Administrative warrants have been used to make immigration arrests in the past only if the agents were invited in. But the Supreme Court in 1972 ruled in the case of Chadwick v. City of Tampa that search warrants should be issued by a neutral and detached magistrate capable of determining probable cause to forcibly enter a home. On February 3rd, 2026, DHS released a media statement that stated illegal aliens, however, don't have the same rights as citizens. Under federal immigration law, officers may issue an administrative warrant, which means that the probable cause finding is made by an executive branch officer rather than a judicial officer. This is consistent with broad judicial recognition that illegal aliens aren't entitled to the same Fourth Amendment protections as U.S. citizens. This statement is in direct conflict with U.S. v. Verdugo-Urquidez. Combine this with the mountains of video showing the violence that ICE agents are inflicting upon these people and citizens, and you have the crux as to why so many people are protesting the actions of ICE. In short, they are violating the constitutional protections of these people and using extreme cruelty to detain them. It does not matter if these individuals were criminals or not. All people are afforded due process no matter what. So I have described how the federal government is violating the Constitution on multiple occasions. Where are all the anti-government protesters at? Where are all the Boogaloo Boys and the Second Amendment people? Why is it that Bundy had hundreds of patriots that came to his defense when he perceived his rights being violated, but when actual rights of people are being violated, they're just non-existent? It seems they have morphed into people screaming just comply now in the comment sections over social media. Something else I'd like to point out deals with the murder of Alex Pretty. FBI Director Kash Patel said,
as Christie said, you cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple. You don't have that right to break the law. And
DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said,
of any peaceful protester that shows up with a gun and ammunition rather than a sign.
And on top of that, even the great Second Amendment protector Donald Trump himself said,
with that being said, you can't have guns. You can't walk in with guns. You just can't. And you can't, listen, you can't walk in with guns. You can't do that, but...
By the same logic, then, every one of those individuals who brought weapons to the Bundy protest should have been painted in the same light. But that wasn't the case. There are pictures of people aiming loaded firearms at federal agents and nothing happened to them. Why is it okay in that instance to bring loaded firearms to a protest, but not in the instance of an anti-ICE protest? What is even crazier is that the people trying to defend Bundy went there with the intent to shoot if needed. Mr. Pretty never made any statement as to why he was carrying that gun. So what is the difference? Logically, there isn't much of a difference between the Bundy and anti-ICE protest. Both have one side who believes constitutional rights are being violated and they need to openly use their First Amendment right to voice their concern. Both have individuals with weapons and confrontations with federal agents. These two facts are all that actually matter, but it is how the federal government responds to these two facts that is the main difference, and that begins with how the federal government views the perceived perpetrators. See, in the case of Bundy, the federal government followed the law before they tried to take his property. 21 years of following the law, to be exact. Bundy had his due process and was never thrown in jail while actively violating multiple court orders. He was breaking the law. Why is he treated so differently? I can point out some things and only you can draw a conclusion. Bundy is a white cattle rancher, the poster child of what it means to be an American. Those who came to his defense saw themselves as Bundy. Oh, look here, US citizens entering a restricted area and not complying. Also, don't these people have jobs? It seems it's okay to take up arms when you are white rural American, but if you live in urban America, that right just doesn't exist. The anti-ICE protesters came to the defense of non-citizens and citizens alike, people whom the Trump administration has painted as non-human and criminal. When you label them as such, you otherize them and take away from seeing them as human beings. It makes it easier to do harmful things to groups you don't see equally. So in the mind of a Trump supporter, they see protesters as the enemy because they are protecting the enemy. Bundy was never painted as an enemy. He was never painted as someone who didn't deserve humanity. Obama did make a reference to him at a correspondence dinner saying,
180 that fast since Rand Paul disinvited that Nevada rancher from this dinner. As a general rule, things don't end well if the sentence starts, "Let me tell you something I know about the Negro."
and that's all he said about him. So while both parties are claiming foul on the government, only one is committing that foul. The Trump administration violating the 4th and 5th Amendment rights of the people. All of Bundy's rights were given to him and respected. Another difference is with the actual action of enforcement. With Bundy, great steps were taken to not escalate the situation into violence. In fact, as soon as violence was foreseen, the government stepped back. Is that what we have seen with the murder of Renee Good and Alex Preddy? Nope. Their strategy was escalation of violence, as if they were the undocumented people. They used the same playbook on them as they did with those they were trying to enforce the law against. They never tried to de-escalate the situation. It was about raw power and authority. Comply or die. Also, even when one compared the two based upon law, Bundy was charged with violating multiple federal laws to include trespassing on federal lands and unauthorized and unlawful grazing of livestock on property owned by the United States. Depending on whether someone entered the US unlawfully, which is a misdemeanor, or overstayed their visa/permit, a civil infraction, the Trump administration is treating them all the same. Was Bundy treated the same as these undocumented? No, and I wonder why. Also, I want to point out this question and answer because children being at the anti-ICE protest was something the right said was the fault of the protesters, and they didn't belong in situations like those.
About children being down there and possibly in the line of fire if something happens.
You know what? You're in the line of fire. The ban on the sheriff.
But what do you think about the children being? Do you think the children should be down there right now?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Would you think that if one of them gets killed?
No, because that isn't our fault. That's not their parents'
But
fault.
it's clearly a dangerous situation. Would you admit that it's a dangerous situation?
Because the government has made it such.
Yeah, you're right. They overstepped as usual, as always.
Okay.
It has to stop somewhere.
It's got to stop somewhere.
It does. If we don't stand up now,
I'm really not angry at you.
Both of these ladies agree that if a child was to get hurt while at that protest, it would be the fault of the government, not that of the parents or Bundy. I bring this up because a common reply for children at anti-ICE protests is like this one here. So in one instance, you have people cheering on a white man defying the government, and on the other hand, you have those same people who are now saying comply or die to Americans protesting the government's violation of people's rights. Am I missing something here? It's been a while. Sorry guys, I just didn't feel like making videos anymore because they don't really do that well, but I really wanted to say something on this topic. But yeah, if you like it, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok. That's where I'm most active. I'm going to try posting more on YouTube. We'll see if that works. But yeah, take it easy, y'all.